Planning Commission meeting for July 2nd, 2018 comes to order. Aaron, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Why I always pick Aaron, I don't know.
Put your right hand over your heart. Repeat.
Thank you, Aaron. At this time, any member of the audience may comment on any matter that is not on the agenda this evening. If anybody would like to come forward and comment anything that's on their mind, no. Any requests for continuance, withdrawals, postponements, recording of ex-agenda or agenda items, or additions of ex-agenda items, anyone?
No.
No? Did everybody get a chance to look over the minutes from the previous meeting on May 2nd, I think it was? Any changes, corrections?
I have one correction.
Go ahead.
It's on the fourth page. At the middle of the page where it says Kevin Elliott, U.S. Forest Service, stated there would be less than 10 visitors per day. The second sentence, that should say Mr. Poirier, the architect, stated that the entire development has 52 extra spaces. So I think that was my fault. I made a correction earlier to the first sentence, and it wasn't supposed to be changed in the second sentence. So
I'll try to.
Are you, and Holly's doing double duty this evening, so we'll all talk really slow.
Yes, talk very slowly.
Can I ask, I wasn't at the meeting, but just a point of clarification, if I can. I don't know what page. Maybe it's page 5, then. I don't see how you found page 4, but it's Commissioner Williams asked if parking would be lost, do we see it under Jack's comments? Asked if parking would be lost for processing of the lot line adjustment. Ms. Owens answered, no, it's basically just moving the lot line and there will be a reciprocal parking agreement. Was that a recorded reciprocal parking agreement? I mean, or does that go without saying? I just...
No, there will be one that will be recorded.
It'll be a recorded one.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
It runs with the land then.
It runs
Yeah,
with the
that's what
land.
I gathered you all wanted. I just wanted to clarify. Thank you. Okay,
Thank
so
you.
only one change? Yes. Okay, we're okay with that, Holly?
Yes.
Okay, so with that change, we're going to make a motion to approve the minutes for this meeting. Move. Second? Approve? Second. Okay, with the one little change, the meeting, or the minutes for this meeting are approved. And now we will hear and act upon what's on our agenda this evening. Holly?
Good evening. Planning Commissioners, Holly Owen, Planning Director for the City of Solvang. We're here tonight at council direction, to review options and make a recommendation on zoning districts that could theoretically allow medical cannabis dispensaries as a use in the city. Just to clarify, allowing is a subject to a process that is not yet in place. We're not talking about the process of allowing these businesses. We've been instructed to identify zoning districts that could theoretically allow these. The way in which we would approve that would not necessarily just be a conditional use permit, although that may also be required. But given consultation with a number of jurisdictions around the state and some consultants who specialize in this regulatory process, there will be some sort of regulatory use permit that would be required before we would allow this particular use or cannabis products of any kind in the city of Solvang. Just to bring you up to speed on what was proposed today at a 4 o'clock meeting at council, it was determined that before we wanted to consider allowing any use like this, we needed to put some sort of taxation measure in place. Taxation measures are required as ballot measures to be voted on. And as we started considering this a couple of weeks ago, we realized that we had very little time in which to bring forth a ballot initiative. And we did some research. The attorneys did a lot of extra work. And we made, again, a lot of outreach to other communities to determine what would be most appropriate. By a vote of 3-1-1 today, this afternoon, Council determined that they wished to bring forward a ballot initiative that would tax cannabis products at 5 to 10% per year on gross sales receipts, with a no more than 1% increase per year. I've asked Dave, since he was the attorney present, to make sure that he weighs in if I missed something in particular about that initiative.
Yeah, the initiative will be placed before the voters. Since it's a general tax, it has to be approved by a majority of the voters at the November election. It is not a special tax because the proceeds from the tax would be deposited into the general fund. The language of the proposed ballot measure would state that the tax would be used to fund general municipal services such as street repair, parks, and law enforcement. And Holly was right about the range. It's going to be set at an initial 5% and could be adjusted upwards or downwards by the City Council by ordinance or resolution to a maximum of 10%, and in no particular year increasing more than 1%. They could, however, drop more than 1% in a particular year if they wish to do so. And just to be clear, the way that the ballot initiative was drafted, it does not specify that it applies only to medicinal cannabis businesses. It applies to all businesses, because the concern is that if the City Council authorizes the implementation of medicinal cannabis businesses within the city and does not address the taxation of them, if the state were to come by and preempt the entire field and allow recreational cannabis businesses within the city, there would be no tax on them if the city were to limit that ballot measure to solely medicinal businesses. So the ballot measure is broad in its impact to cover all cannabis businesses of whatever description.
Thank you. So that pretty much gives a summary of why we have moved forward with the taxation measure that we have, why the umbrella is so big to allow for a number of uses. That's to protect us in case other actions by the state make it legal, and then we now have at least a taxation measure in place to capture some of that revenue. It has been asked of us, though, as planning commissioners and me as the planning director, to bring forth to you the discussion about where, if anywhere, we would like to recommend to council that that medical cannabis dispensaries be allowed in the city. It is assumed that the TRC is not on the table. That was clear direction from council. And I think that's would not surprise me if that were your thoughts on that too. That said, there were several recommendations in the staff report as to where might be appropriate places to find those businesses. This all occurred on May 29th. The City Council directed Planning Commission to bring forward those recommendations. And once we make those recommendations, then it's up to council to determine what next steps are. They may decide to go forward with what was to be the second reading of the urgency ordinance, and put that codify that for us, make it illegal for all activities, and then change that over time. Or they may take your recommendation and go forward with a new type of ordinance at this time. One thing is for certain is that these are businesses that are by nature in need of some more scrutiny, let's say, given the fact that they have cash-only operations often. And we have heard from other jurisdictions that a regulatory use permit or some sort of regulatory permitting process is certainly to be highly recommended. We would want the best representation of this type of business possible to come into Solvang, and that would help us with that ranking and rating system that we would quite potentially propose for candidates. That's a process that needs some research and some exploration, and perhaps the assistance of a consultant. So I personally feel like we should be in no rush to figure out what that process may be. It's lengthy, and we want to do it correctly. So, with that, we have some suggestions that are in your staff report about zoning districts that you might want to consider, and that will conclude my staff report at this point, and I'm interested in what you may have to offer. I'm available for questions.
Okay, commissioners, you want to start? Gay, you have questions?
I did ask earlier about whether medical cannabis dispensaries are cash businesses still, and they are. I confirmed with the planning director that prescriptions or doctor's cards are required for medical cannabis, and can't even get into one of those facilities, at least in Grover Beach, unless you have a card. And also confirmed that all medical cannabis dispensaries are required to be state licensed in addition to locally permitted. I have some recommendations and items for discussion later, but that's all the questions I have at this time.
Anybody else? Aaron?
I don't have any questions.
Why is it a cash business?
In part because cannabis is still a Schedule I controlled substance at the federal level, which means it cannot be sold legally under federal law. There are some moves at the federal level to change that approach, but it has changed depending on the administration. And because it is looked down upon at the federal level, banks are reluctant to allow.
And the local level.
And the local level.
Personally.
Yeah. The banks are reluctant to allow establishments of lines of credit, checking accounts, credit cards, and so on. So they've largely been relegated to a cash basis. There are some banks in some of the states that have legalized it for recreational purposes that have been willing to entertain some credit lending on it, but I would say it's in the minority of financial institutions.
Okay. This is just so wacky. You made a good point, Jack, about what if you rent to somebody and then the feds crack down and then they take the... Yeah, if you would bring that up, I appreciate that.
Yeah, the question I had was if I own a property in town and I rent it out to a medical cannabis dispensary and the feds decide to crack down, what happens?
The short answer is I don't know, because it would really depend on the enforcement methods that the feds use. There certainly could be criminal prosecution. There could be asset forfeiture. There's a whole range of options that the federal government would have. Under the prior administration, the approach was that if a business was licensed in a following state law, the feds would not come in and prosecute under those circumstances. In the absence of that direction at the federal level currently, I can't tell you what the approach would be at this point.
Thank you.
And we're also not here to discuss whether we want this or not. It's a matter of it's coming and where.
Well, our direction from council was to make recommendations on really what is at this point a theoretical location of
Okay.
a medical cannabis dispensary.
Yes.
And
Though that was fairly prescribed.
Right,
So.
and that is the direction from the council. And also keep in mind that this is not, as Holly said, not actually establishing one. It would be up to the market. And as long as there is an area in town, landlords may be reluctant to rent in those areas that are established. So it's essentially just opening up the opportunity for such a business and allowing the marketplace to take over from there.
And also the fact that you can currently get medical marijuana delivered to your home in the city of Solvang now. So it's out there, whether you put up a wall to keep it out or keep it in. It's happening now.
One of the issues that I was curious about when I spent a lot of time on the phone in the last couple of weeks talking to other planning directors around the state, and I spoke at length to the planning director in Grover Beach, and it was very insightful to hear about some of their challenges, some of the things some of the assistance they received from outside sources in order to set up a ranking and a rating and approval process. But I did want to know approximately how much revenue they had generated, because they had one dispensary that had been operating for a year, and it was significant. It was $4 million gross receipts.
And they have one in Grover Beach right now?
That was one. Now they have more, and they have now allowed. Yes, they have 4, and they have now allowed adult use as of this week, I believe.
So before it was just medical.
Before it was just medical.
And they had
Yes.
4 million.
That was one. Yes. Now that was that's a significant number. That was just one number in one jurisdiction, but he did share that.
And we did have a presentation at the council meeting last week, I believe, with the dispensary from Goleta that estimated revenues within the city of Solvang if it were allowed to come in of, I think it was 1.2 million annually.
Is what they're doing in Goleta right now?
No, that's what they anticipated the demand would be within the city, which, if the tax passes, would result in fairly significant tax revenues for the city.
Plus the percentage of the state sales tax that we get back.
Correct.
Because they'd be paying a 7.75% state tax and then a 5% city tax on top of that.
There's also a state excise tax that gets distributed out in a different manner than sales tax. So it's fairly, there's a fair number of levels of taxation involved.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the difference if someone wants to start it outside of the city? Can they avoid this whole 5%, 10% tax? And
It depends on where they establish. If they establish in the county, it's going to be subject to the county regulations. If they establish or try
Lompoc?
to, Lompoc,
Be different.
yeah, the local jurisdictions have been given a fair amount of discretion on how they wish to regulate it. The taxation is obviously subject to the voters' will. It's not something that local governments can impose on their own without an approval of the voters. But the way that various communities across California have regulated both medicinal and recreational cannabis is as varied as your imagination. There are hundreds of different ways that it's been approached throughout the state.
Fill us in on the city of Buellton, where they're at, and county on medical cannabis. Do we know?
Buellton, as far as I know, to date, has decided not to go forward with a ballot initiative or approving any kind of use that even medical that I know of. Now, when I started doing my research in the last couple of weeks, it seemed that the order of business was that a jurisdiction would look at a taxation rate, and then 2 or 3, maybe 2 years later, would begin to allow those uses to come in. Some of the jurisdictions were maybe foresighted enough to do ballot initiatives in 2016, and they're just getting around to opening some of their first establishments this year. So it's a longer process. So it could be that Buellton is thinking about a tax initiative, and they just haven't let us know. But
And even this whole tax issue is out of our realm. I think we're just all curious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It was all in my realm too, but it was important to learn quickly. So.
I just never understood why they call it I mean, to me, recreational is throwing a ball around, not getting stoned. It's recreational marijuana. That doesn't make any sense. Yeah.
Do you know what the county regulations are on medical cannabis?
I do. I can get that for you.
I'm just
get that
curious
answer
if
for you.
there will be some in San Inez, if there'll be some in Los Olivos.
I will research
That's a
that
good
answer
point.
for you.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, any other staff questions? Questions of staff? No? At this point, we'll open it up to public comment. I have 2 requests to speak. Tracy? State your name.
Tracy Beard, I come to you as a community leader. I'm concerned about the schools. We haven't talked about, we need to have a mileage of putting it away from the schools. We need to truly look at that. We need to protect our students, protect our children in this community. So I would ask you, as you look at where you want to put it, you need to keep it away from schools and have a certain amount of mileage that when you do this, to keep it away from the school system. Because that has not been talked about at all. And I think if we're talking that this is medical marijuana, you put it down.
It's in here, yeah.
Where the hospital is, and put it down in that kind of facility, you know, and in that kind of area. Because then it's just like they're just like a doctor where we put them over in that. We have a certain regulation for that.
That's on the map, isn't it, Holly? There's 3 points on that map right now that you're looking at that we have as well. And that seems to be where the recommendations are, is next to, it would make sense if somebody's going to prescribe it, put it next to where they're prescribing it. But
Now, I could be
in a
wrong.
town this small, though, it's kind of hard to keep away from, keep a distance from lots of things.
But I think that allows us, if we do, because there's no schools over in that way, it allows us a mileage aspect between the schools. And we have to look at that for our children, and if it is really medical marijuana, it should be over there in the medical community and in the district.
I agree with you.
That is my recommendation to you, but I know our schools are, I think, under institution, I wanna say too, correct? Under there, so we have to be real careful how we word where we wanna put it, and I ask you, and I really want you to all think about it, you have children, and you do not want these children going there, it needs to be very well regulated. If I had my personal way, I'd say put it right next to the sheriff's office, but unfortunately, I have a library there that kids go to every day.
Yeah.
That would be my recommendation.
Well, from what I understand, too, you can't get in the door of a medical marijuana dispensary without a medical marijuana card, so a kid's not going to walk into a dispensary.
Well, let me clarify a couple things. Unless you want to
Thanks.
go through public comment, I can answer the questions now.
No,
okay.
no, it's fine.
Under state law currently, it's Health and Safety Code 11362.768. There's a 600-foot radius from any medicinal cannabis dispensary and a school. That's already in state
in
law.
here.
That's not something that we need to put in there. It's something that you have discretion, obviously, to increase if you wanted to at the local level. That's something. As far as the operational things that would be required of a dispensary, that will remain on our work list. We are currently in the process of putting together a fairly strict set of operational concerns, such as having to show a medicinal cannabis card to enter the premises, the hours of operation, the security, cameras, all that would be operational details that would be something that would come to the city council later. That's not something that you at the planning commission have been asked by the city council to chime in on. But if you come up with zones and the council decides, okay, we will go ahead and approve medicinal cannabis dispensaries within those zones, they will task us with the next step of ensuring that they are secure facilities.
Thank you.
I want to say, I actually believe, and I think I'm correct on this, as of July 31st, it's 6 plants no matter what for everyone. There is no medical marijuana anymore. You can't grow it or anything, it's just 6 plants for everyone. So, I mean, I have a great concern for this community to keep it in the unique fashion that it is right now.
Got it. Thank you, Tracy. Next up, Colleen. State your name, please.
I'm Colleen Heffley, and I work at the Los Criados Boys Camp for the incarcerated teenage boys. I'm not here representing the camp, I'm representing myself. One of the things, bigger things, that the boys come to camp for is drug abuse. One of the biggest drugs they abuse, of course, is marijuana. They come, they're high, they do their stealing while they're high on marijuana. They commit break-ins while they're high. They drive high and get into crashes. They get into gangbang situations, all sorts of stuff like that. A lot of times when they're high. One of the things that I thought was a little funny at first, because I would hear them bragging, is, oh yeah, I can get a medical marijuana card really easy. All you have to do is go to the doctor and do blah, blah, blah. And then they would brag about, yeah, my uncle's got a medical marijuana card. Yeah, he can get me all the weed that I want. Or my older brother has one. They can get it. So to me, it's kind of like the medical marijuana card is a bit of a joke. It's not just for medicinal purposes. It's an avenue, a gateway for somebody to legitimately go in and buy marijuana and then give it to their friends or whatever. Tracy was talking about, not having it located near where kids hang out, and then you were saying you can't even go inside without the card. Well, how do you think underage kids get alcohol? They hang out somewhere in front of the liquor store, get somebody going in, say $20, I'll give you $20 if you go down and get a 6-pack or something like that. Same thing's going to happen in front of the medical marijuana stores. These kids that I work with do it all the time, this kind of stuff. So you've got to be very aware of if you place things anywhere in the valley, it's going to have a big impact with the kids. As a parent of a high school student who graduated a few years ago from here, we have a serious drug problem in the valley. I know a lot of parents think that we don't, but we have a serious drug problem in the valley. This only adds to it. I might be in favor of medical marijuana if you went over to the Sampson Clinic, got a prescription from the doctor, went inside of Rite Aid, a licensed pharmacist dispensed it to you, and you took it home and you used it. When you needed a refill, you had to contact the doctor, go back into Rite Aid. But it's not, when you're going in and when I go into Rite Aid and I get my blood pressure pills, I can't say, oh, I like the ones that are bubble gum flavored, or I want the ones with this or that or whatever. It's a medicine that's prescribed, and I take it. It's a total different ballgame at a medical marijuana facility. You go in, oh, would you like this? Would you like this? I can give you this and this. It's really, if it's truly medical marijuana, it needs to be just like all the other prescribed medications that we have. The reason why it's probably not is what this man was talking about and what we teach the kids at camp in high school history. 12th graders, we all teach them about U.S. government and U.S. Constitution, federal law, state law. Federal law trumps state law. The only reason that the state of California and the other states are coming up with these laws that allow the marijuana is because the federal law is not enforcing it. So that's how it's sliding by. But the trouble is, it's really not legal under the federal law.
Well, the party that runs this state thinks it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well,
So
anyhow.
that's not, we're not here to discuss that, though. We can have whatever opinions we want.
Anyhow, my recommendation.
Yeah, and the voters did.
is
Mhm.
Any medical marijuana dispensary does not belong in Solvang.
Thank you. Okay, that's it for public comment? That was Joy. Oh, Joyce, I'm sorry. I didn't know if that was the last one. My apologies. Come on up, Joyce. State your name.
Just doing something here. Hi, I'm Joyce Milliken. I live here in Solvang. And I wasn't here on May 29th. So I'm just curious, because this is coming it seems like it's coming fast. And I'm just not sure that the substantiation of the need for a medical marijuana facility anywhere in our city is actually needed. I'm concerned. Where are the prescriptions for the marijuana coming from? Are they coming from doctors, hospitals, whatever? And I don't know if these medical professionals have been interviewed, or if there's been a survey as to how many numbers, how many people are actually seeking marijuana in the city. Have they been given prescriptions by local doctors here in this city? I understand that there are some dispensaries in Lompoc, and I understand that there's a possibility if I go all the way to Santa Maria to go to Trader Joe's, that if someone here in this city actually needed medical marijuana, they could drive to Lompoc and get it fairly quickly. With all of the ramifications of Santa Ynez and Solvang and all of our cities, 5 cities around here, I just am concerned that we aren't seeking the medical foundation for the need for a dispensary. It seems like somewhere we're getting, it would be really cool to get the tax revenue, and that we ought to do that so that we can get the money, rather than let's be concerned about the people that are going to be impacted by this move to get medical marijuana, and then what's going to come after that. So I'm real hesitant to go ahead without knowing what's the actual need for the people in our city to have the dispensary in the first place. I hope somebody has an answer for me on that. I mean, maybe it was substantiated in May 29th, which I missed the meeting. So can that be answered now?
I think all the arguments that are not arguments, all the topics that are being discussed tonight are things that should have been discussed when this thing passed. when these laws first went into effect. Now it's it's the law of the land, so now how do we deal with it? And all we've been asked to do this evening is to pick a place where it would go. Now, there's nobody lining up right now to put a dispensary in town, but if one did come, I don't want to say it's being forced down our throat, but if one did come, where would we put it? That's the discussion we're having this evening.
So as far as our own city, don't get to, because it's the law of the land, we don't get to decide for ourselves if it's a need for our city? It seems like we ought to know.
Oh, we do.
What?
We made a recommendation to City Council months ago and said nothing. We said we don't want any dispensaries at all in the city. Done. We did our job.
You need to
City
take it to
Council
council.
looked at it and said, ooh, maybe we want to look at medical marijuana dispensaries, even though we had recommended 0. They kicked it to us to say, okay, we might want to have medicinal marijuana, cannabis in the city. If we did, where do you guys recommend it would be? We're like, well, we recommended not to have it, but now you're telling us you want it, but you're saying if you want it, we're going to recommend where we have it. We could say it could be only in C3 if it came, and they could say, no, we want it next to the school within 300. They could say the TRC zone. City Council decides it. We are just simply giving them a recommendation, but we already gave them our recommendation. They kicked it back to us to look at it again, just the medical aspect of it.
But the medical community isn't being asked, or the hospital is not being asked?
We don't know what City Council, what jarred them.
Okay,
I
I
don't
need
know
to
if the
talk
vote
with
was
them.
a 5-0, a 3-1, or what the vote was, what the need was. They were a 3-1. They just said, would you guys, if we decide to pass an ordinance that allows it, where would you recommend that you put it? That's number one. And then the second one, why they voted today about having a 5 to 10% sales tax is if we decide to do it, then it has to be on a ballot because it's a general taxation. Or if the state law changes and they mandate it, then we would have our taxing in place. So it's a very evolving, yes.
It
It's
just
all
seems
we're
like
all
we're
trying to
going in
learn
this
it.
whole thing backwards. So anyway, I guess I have to talk to the city council.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any other public comment? Lenny? Approach. State your name.
Greg Milliken, also a community member, resident of Solvang. I took a look this afternoon at the staff report and the proposed resolution, and it referred to potentially 3 zones, I think, where it might be. And I think the discussion we've been hearing has both been on general topics and also, well, which zones and what would their locations be. And it's seemed to me as I thought about it and thought about the type of things going on in the city that are indispensable, inherent in what makes the city, that there is some sense, if, as you say, pick a spot where there's a logic and an appropriateness for such a location over there near the hospital and the medical offices and all of that stuff, because that stuff is there. The tour buses aren't going down to, Viborg or that area over there. There's a locus of community activity there that's centered on this kind of thing, if it is medicinal. Different down by the stone fields and the quarry down there. So I would just question, why would there be any reason to have it in any zones other than that professional office, if that's where it is? So, and if that's within the purview of what the city council has asked, then I guess as a community member, my thought would be, well, if you must say pick a spot, well, why not that spot? Because it seems most fitting.
You're exactly right. Thank you. Any other public comment? At this time, we'll close this public comment and discuss it amongst the commissioners. I won't go first. Go ahead, Gay.
Okay, well, first of all, just to elaborate a little bit on what Aaron said, I think we did believe that allowing the delivery of medical marijuana to people who had appropriate doctor's prescriptions or cards or whatever they require would satisfy the need of those who need medical marijuana in Solvang. So we did not recommend a medical marijuana or cannabis dispensary. That said, now we have to agree on where it would be a good idea to put one if the city council decided we should have one or more. And I think the 3 proposed zones make the most sense, but I would agree that the professional office zone does make the most sense because it's near the doctor's offices. There's at least 1 or 2 labs down there, and of course the hospital. So it does make sense, but I have a real concern. Some of those locations, certainly on Valley, whatever that drive is, where Sansom Clinic is, and Village Lane, thank you. There are people living there, very close, like just across the parking lot from where Sansom is, and across the street from some of these labs and so forth. I don't think 100-foot distance away is enough, and I'm not sure we have much more than that from homes and condos. So we need to look at that very carefully. If we're trying to keep it away from children, well, you're going to certainly find a lot of children at home in their residences. So I worry that that's going to be a problem. And I've heard some of you say the same thing. We also have to make a lot of changes to our zoning ordinance and ordinances to change, if we decide to do this in certain zones, what the permitted uses would be. We'd have to add a medical cannabis dispensary and so on. So there's a lot of things that would need to be done even once these recommendations were made and the city council made their decision. I believe we would need to require a regulatory conditional use permit so that we can get all of the necessary conditions of approval in place, such as the operational details, the security, which would be extremely important. I think that there needs to be a lack of visibility into a dispensary from the building exterior so people can't see what's in there and decide to try to break in and steal it. I truly think that this is, like any other dispensary, is going to be an attractive nuisance in Solvang. It's a cash business. That may change in time, and in time we could consider perhaps delaying this decision, and if a bank or banks step up to allowing these businesses to be more normal and not have a lot of cash around, then maybe we could then change the ordinance to allow these things. So that's some of my thinking. There's one other issue that I'd like to ask about at the end. It isn't directly related to the zones, so I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Aaron, if you want.
Sure. Yeah, I think that I would stand on what we had decided before, which is the medical needs are met through mail order or delivery to homes as it currently is. But if the city council is absolutely going to vote to put it someplace and they're asking us for a recommendation, then that's a different animal. Logically, you think it should be in the professional office zone. I disagree. Those are doctors, dentists, homes. There are lots of kids, lots of families, lots of condos. You've got all the homes off of Viborg. You've got the condos at the end of Village Lane. Yeah, well, that's across from Viborg. All those homes. You have the other professional office is over by Valley Oaks Bank. Those 2 lots, which are on 246, there are homes right across the street from that. I don't think the professional office is set up as a retail zone. That's why it's a professional office. It doesn't have parking requirements that a retail zone has. It has signage that is different than a retail zone has. So to me, by us simply stating, well, it's by a hospital and that's where the doctors and the dentists are and that's where the pharmacies are, so that makes logic, it's a total different animal. There is no retail that you're buying down at Dr. Roger Lane's office. And in fact, our PO says, professional office zone says, there is no sale of retail in these places. It is not designed for that high volume of people that could come in. Will there be a high volume of people? I don't know. I find out that if Buellton doesn't do it and the county doesn't allow it, we're the only one for 30 miles in either direction, north, south, and east. That seems silliness, complete and utter silliness, that we want to be a magnet to be a medical retail hub for the central Santa Barbara County. I'm an ex-DA. I was a drug and fraud prosecutor for 20 years, so I get what you're saying. That's where you know me from. So I completely agree with the statements that are made. And I understand the medical cards and how easy it is to get. I've kicked people off properties and they say, but I have a card. Like, that is a get out of jail free card. You've got to be kidding me. That's a whole different debate. We're talking about just where, but this is where I'm coming from. So I don't think the PO, I don't think we should have it at all. I don't want to see us as a magnet. I think it's a silly thing that we're even having this discussion. It's a waste of time, waste of staff's time, but City Council gave us marching orders as they gave staff. So if we're focused back on zones, the only place I would recommend would be C3. C3 zone is the castle. We call it the castle coming into town. There's no houses close by, or there is up on Skip Mesa, but it's far enough away. There's no schools. There is adequate access. It's not in a neighborhood. It's not in a retail or a professional office neighborhood. It's down there in a dusty, messy industrial park. And to me, and right across the street from, so it's very easy when you get that medical card. And it's limited. There's one. I mean, when we look at this map, there is one C3 zone, and that is that zone right there where the Buell Flat gas station is and the castle, which we call the castle. It doesn't go into industrial of Nielsen's. It's only there. That limits it in scope. I'd like to limit it in numbers, but those limited numbers and the sign limits and all this major conditional use permit that they'd have to go through with security and all the things, that's for a different discussion. But if we're only focused on what zone, I'd like it to be, if we're forced to have it in one zone, I would say that would be the only zone I would vote to have it in. Now, our illustrious sheriff sitting in the back might say, my gosh, we want a spotlight on it. We don't want it buried down there off the highway, and so maybe I would look silly to even recommend it. But I sure don't want to see it in the tourist-related, obviously residential, the C2, or the PO. C3 is the only zone that I would vote for if I had a gun to my head and I had to decide. But I would vote to not even recommend it at all. That's how I feel.
You know, it's funny. I was actually steering towards Gabe, but you've actually kind of changed my mind. But when I looked at the three areas, and I work, my office is in that lumberyard, to me it just seems like this industrial seedy area, and then you're going to have a pot place and people coming and going in this warehouse district. I'm thinking of like downtown Oakland by the waterfront, you know. That, I think it should be by the doctor, but I think actually what you say makes sense. But the only points I would make too is the fastest growing segment of the population that's smoking pot is people my age. It's not so much kids. I have one who graduated from high school recently, this last May, and I have a junior in college, and I talk to them. I know they don't do drugs right now, but they sure know where it is. And it's very, very prevalent amongst young people, and it's not just this valley, it's everywhere. There's nothing I can do about that other than teach my kids to do the right thing. But it's people that are our age that are using the medical marijuana more than it is the kids. And I think it's documented that it is the fastest growing part of the population that's smoking now is people that are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. We're already getting it delivered to the valley. I mean, people can already get delivered to their homes. And do we get tax money on that? No. So the pot's being delivered to people's homes in Solvang. We're not making a penny on that. But like I said, that's not what we're here to argue, to decide upon. I've actually changed my mind, and I think the industrial area probably would be the best place to put it. There are no homes. You'll get a lot of complaints from Skip Mesa, but you got to put something every time we meet. It's always there's going to be somebody upset about everything we put anywhere in this town because it affects people, and you got to think what's best for the community as a whole, and not just for what's behind New Frontiers and things like that. So I actually would side with you and say I think that's probably the smartest place to put it.
If we had to do it.
If we had to do it. It's like we're all like going, it's not my job, but if I had to, that's why I'm saying yes. I think that probably in C3 it would be the best place to go. Jack?
I agree with all of the above. C3 is the one, based on what was here, that I would pick if we had to do it. I don't particularly see a need for it in Solvang. at all, much less one or more. The way this is written, it could be an infinite number.
I think it's 2, isn't it? It's a
No, it just says dispensaries.
There was no stated recommendation. There was discussion at council about the number 2, but it did not come to you as a determination that
Yeah, it was open.
was going to be made at this time.
So I hadn't thought through as much as Aaron has about becoming a hub, but that's certainly something to consider. But our job here tonight is to recommend a location. If the city council wants to ignore our suggestion from April and go ahead and do it, then I would say in C3 is the only logical place.
Yeah, C3 and PO would be fine with me, I guess. I don't participate in any of in the marijuana smoking or any of that stuff, but I guess if you had to pick a spot, those 2 would work fine.
Any other discussion, commissioners?
I just want to say, I think PO, while it makes a lot of sense, has a lot of drawbacks, particularly how close the PO areas are to homes, many homes. So I'm
dentist office right next door.
right. I wouldn't want it to be next door to my doctor's office either. I'm convinced C3 is the place.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think it should, well then, at this point, would someone like to make a motion as to recommend to city council where we, the planning commissioners, feel that the dispensary, should it ever come, is going to be placed, would be in C3. Somebody make a motion?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so the planning commission recommends that if it ever does come to town, it's going next to my office. Okay.
You got what you wanted.
And you want a complimentary card, right?
Yeah. This is even bizarre at my age that we're even talking about this, but this is the state of California and the state of this country, so what are you going to do? Any other comments, planning commissioners' comments to?
I do,
Go
excuse
ahead.
me. I didn't mean to interrupt. There is one issue I'd like to raise again, having to do with the recommendation we made to City Council, and I hope this is appropriate, but at the May 29th meeting, I was watching it on live stream, and it did not appear that the rationale for one of the recommendations that the Planning Commission made had been provided to the City Council members, and that had to do with the recommendation that they consider a permit for individual indoor cultivation of their 6 plants. And the reason for that is that a lot of damage can be done to property. If there was a permitting process, the city would at least be able to protect property owners who had renters who wanted to cultivate their cannabis indoors. They would hopefully be required to get written permission from the property owner before they did that. So a permit would allow that. The other thing is the city would also be able to make sure that if anybody wanted to make electrical modifications, it could be dangerous and could burn the house down. That sort of thing I think we need to attend to because the health and safety of the neighbors are at stake here. Even though the state allows everyone to grow their 6 plants indoors. There can be a lot of damage from water, mold, fire, all sorts of things. So I'd like the City Council perhaps to reconsider that recommendation when they get together and discuss the ordinance again.
Thank you. Any other director's comments? Holly, do we need to discuss the CEQA exemption? No? Okay.
Just a quickie.
Yes?
I'm a volunteer for the Red Cross, and one of the call-outs I went on in Buellton,
Come on up.
one of the call-outs I went on in Buellton was a rental property there, and the people inside were growing marijuana, way overloaded on the outlets because they were growing it inside, started a fire, caused a lot of damage to their landlord's property. So what she's saying has happened right here in town a few years ago, and it kind of irked me that we had to go out there and take care of these people that were, had basically burned their place down, and that was way before that recreational was legal and medical marijuana was legal and stuff like that. So it happens. They grow it on racks in their place so they can fill. They had a whole bedroom full of racks of all the marijuana that was growing with the lights, because they have to have the light there, and it was just way overloaded, and boom. So it happened.
Thank you.
Just a clarification question, David. This will come to council, and then as a comment or as part of the it will come to it as a comment to reiterate planning commission concern.
Well, currently it was expressed as the concern of one of the planning commissioners. So unless the planning commission also wishes the entire commission to forward that, it would be noted as the comment of Commissioner Infante. If the planning commission as a whole would like to reiterate that, I would suggest that you make a motion to that effect.
Oh, is it just on her last comment on the permit for indoor?
Correct.
And I would make that motion because I thought it was kind of part of that discussion before, but we saw the minutes and we didn't really catch it then either, and staff probably didn't. There was so much going on. I mean, you know, you got to get permits if I'm putting up new umbrellas at my restaurant, for goodness sake, and yet we don't have.
I will say, however, that I'm not aware of any jurisdictions that currently enforce this.
That? Really?
Or that currently have permits
Oakland.
that would involve a regulation of renters' behavior in this regard. So you get into some interesting legal research projects.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure I saw that in the Oakland ordinance.
Yeah, the cities that have indoor cultivation permits will tend to focus on odor, wattage of lighting, noise, things that are within the police powers of the city to regulate. Some cities take the approach, well, we're just going to go ahead and say, we're not going to allow indoor cultivation, and let's see if we get challenged. I think that is a difficult approach to defend from a legal standpoint because state law allows indoor cultivation, but where the state law stops at the door of local government is allowing certain police power regulations. So that's where you would see the type of indoor cultivation permits. As long as it complies with state law and any local laws, then people would proceed on that basis. But I think it would be difficult for a city to take the position no indoor cultivation or make it so onerous in the permitting process as to effectively prohibit indoor cultivation.
Well, I mean, you're not going to totally ban it, obviously, but I mean, having a permit for a 3-kid daycare center. Now, my daughter can have over 3 kids and babysit all day long and violate the law that she doesn't have a permit for it, but at least it's on the books that you're supposed to get a permit for an indoor grow operation up to the 6 plants. People don't do it. They don't do it. I would have liked to have seen that, and I kind of thought that was our recommendation. So I would back that as a recommendation to the city that if they're going, not if they're going to allow, they are allowing up to 6 plants indoor cultivation under state law.
In daycare centers?
Only next to Nielsen's Lumber. And, but that a permitting process should be in place for that, just so the city knows who's doing it. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to be exhaustive because there were people that are just going to do it, as we all know. But just from a standpoint of it also sends a message to landlords who they should all be rewriting their residential leases saying that you can't do this, and it's a violation, much like smoking or having a dog or whatever that they want to put as restrictions. It's up to their own business to do, or they don't want to do it. I mean, so anyway, that's where I'd come down also.
I will say that this is, although I certainly see the value and the utility in this for property owners and to a certain extent for health and safety. There is there is staff time involved, and just like leases that for private property that involve pets, yes or no, smoking, yes or no. You know, you can always add that to your lease as an option. If you grow medicinal plants of a certain nature, you know, you should you should make sure there's no water damage, or make sure that the wiring is up to code, that kind of thing. The enforcement aspect of this is of a little bit of a concern of mine. I know that we just have now a code compliance officer. She's very good. She's experienced, but we don't currently enforce vacation rentals in the city, and so we have to start somewhere with how much time we spend on the regulatory part of our job to serve the citizens.
So are we making another motion here?
You want to make your motion?
Okay, I'll move that the Planning Commission requests that the City Council reconsider the recommendation that the Planning Commission previously made to require a permit for individual indoor growth of cannabis.
All in favor, say aye.
Well,
Or
I'll
sorry.
second it.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Okay. So Holly, you've got that down. They'll discuss that with the council next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, any planning director's comments?
I have been all about cannabis for the last 2 weeks, so I'm glad to see this come to a close, at least for until 4th of July, and then I'm
Okay.
sure that there will be other issues that will resume and need research. So
Great.
thank you.
Thanks for your work.
consideration.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. This meeting is adjourned.